Everybody, good afternoon. Actually, good afternoon. Nice to have you all here. It's really a very special honor for me to be here and to be able to share what I hope will be something interesting with all of you. I know many of you, but there are a few that I don't really know. So come over to me at the end, introduce yourselves, tell me about you, tell me what makes you so special, tell me your favorite color, something so I'll get to know you a little bit. And
For me too.
yes, and my wife Ellen, who is here. Ellen, nice to have you, sweetheart. Thank you. You know what's going to happen, that I'm going to go home tonight and she's going to say, why didn't you say this, and why did you say this, and this? But Baruch Hashem, it's always wonderful to have her. Anything that I do is because she helps me do it. So we really work together as a team. I want to begin by thanking Dina. Dina and David Gadd for opening up their home. You'll please tell David that I thanked him in my name for opening up their absolutely gorgeous home to us. And we hope that you will be able to fill your home with lots of brachos. Or I should say brachot, for a very, very long time to come. And those of you who sat on this side of the table, I'm not sure what you would think. Right? But at least I'll have your attention. Over here, I have no idea what's going to be. And actually, if I were over there, I'd be looking out that way also. So Emir Hashem, it will all be good. I hope so. So I also want to thank Rachel Brescher. Because this would not have happened without Rachel. Rachel had this idea. She is an idea person. She just generates ideas. And what's really amazing is that most of the time Yaakov says, what were you thinking about? But this idea just resonated with all of us. And so Rachel, I just want to thank you for your initiative in putting this together and picking, really a wonderful home to host it, and we are grateful for all of that. And I'm grateful that you've come. I don't know what your day is like, but that you've all been able to make time on a Monday to come. That's really amazing, and thank you very much. And a special shout out to our youngest member. Right? 6 weeks old. Like literally.
Only for you, Rabbi.
Literally 6 weeks old, and in Yirtzeh Hashem. And Yirtzeh Hashem, what we hear today should help as we go. So the topic for today is raising spiritual and confident children. Now, what's amazing about raising spiritual and confident children, and if you'd like to record, please feel free to do so. I'm also recording, and you can have copies of that. What's incredible about raising spiritual and confident children is that for perhaps the most important thing that we need to do in life, there are actually no instructions. Children do not come home from the hospital with an instruction book, which they really should. They teach you at the hospital, okay, this is how you change diapers, right, for new parents. This is how you take care of the umbilical cord until it falls out. And this is how you nurse for those who are nursing. And they don't teach you anything else. And you come home from the hospital and you put this kid to sleep, and this kid doesn't sleep. And you literally don't know what to do. And then you start to realize this is only the beginning of all of the things that I don't know how to do as a parent. And if you think that by the time the second or the third one comes around, you do know what to do as a parent, so I want to share with you my personal experiences. When our firstborn arrived, we were dedicated to being as health conscious as we could possibly be. We used to cook sweet potatoes, and then we would mash them up, and then we would freeze them in ice trays, ice cube trays, so that when we were traveling, we would have fresh sweet potatoes to feed to this child. Chas v'shalom, we would use sweet potatoes out of a jar. Of course, by the time our fourth child came around, we were handing them Doritos. Quiet, here. You're making noise here, have some more chips. So it doesn't necessarily get better or easier, and we might know more what we're supposed to do, but we don't generally do it. So we don't get these lessons, we don't really know what to do. So it's important for all of us to work together as a community to learn how to be better parents when it comes to raising spiritual and confident children. And this is really a group effort. It takes a village. Literally, to raise a child, it takes a village, and you all know that from your interactions with each other. Now, I will tell you that when my kids were born, we had a book. The book was by, anybody know the name? Have you ever heard of this?
Dr. Spock.
Dr. Spock. Who said that? Right? Dr. Spock. There was a book by Dr. Spock. I think for most of you, Dr. Spock is probably, you know Dr. Spock probably from Star Trek. That might be the closest connection to Dr. Spock. But we actually had a book of Dr. Spock who told you all of these things. In other words, all of the things that you were, that you thought, should I worry about this or not worry about this? This rash, this cry, this. You went to Dr. Spock and you saw, and he told you how to do it. Today, Dr. Spock would be run out of the community because all of the things that he wrote in his book, you would never do today to your kids. But at that time, I don't know, Fran, maybe that's what we did. That's how we raised our kids. We raised our kids with Dr. Spock, and Baruch Hashem, they turned out okay. So rest assured that you can't really ruin them, right? They could ruin themselves, that does happen, but you as parents can't really ruin them. And my suggestion would be that when your children reach a particular age and they're ready to move out of the house, they're ready to go on to college, that you sit down with your children and say, listen, I'm going to save you a lot of money and a lot of heartache and a lot of therapy. Whatever it is, it's my fault. It's what I did as a parent, right? Know that going forward. You don't have to spend hours in therapy to find that out. I'm just telling you right now, whatever it is, it's my fault. But by and large, you can't break them, you can't ruin them. You can make a difference in their lives, and that's what we're going to be talking about. So the purpose of coming together today to learn about this assumes that we can indeed make a difference in our children's lives. That what we do can encourage them, can raise them as more spiritual, more confident children. Do we believe that? Does our tradition believe that? Do we as Jews believe that what we do with our children can actually make a difference? Did you ever feel as if no matter what you did or no matter what you said, it didn't make a difference? I know I have felt that way. And not just talking to my wife, but I have felt that way in talking to our children sometimes. That no matter what I said or no matter what I did, it didn't make a difference. But we as Jews subscribe to the principle that what we say and what we do can make a difference, and indeed we are obligated to make that difference in our children's lives. And I want to share two sources with you. You all remember the story of Abraham Avinu and Sodom, right? They had this place, this terrible place, Sodom V'Amorah, which was really composed of 5 towns, even though we only know 2 of their names. Sodom V'Amorah were 2 of the towns. There were 3 other towns, 5 towns in general that needed to be destroyed. I'm not making any comparisons to any other 5 towns that you might know about. But so this went before it, as the time of destroying Sodom V'Amorah came about, so God wrestled with himself. Hashem said, do I reveal this to Abraham or not? So ultimately, you know what happened. Did he or didn't he? Stop staring out the window. Did he or didn't he? Yes, of course. He revealed to Abraham what he was going to do. And the Torah tells us why he revealed this to Abraham. Why it was so important for Hashem to tell Abraham what he was going to do. He could have just destroyed Sodom V'Amorah, and Abraham never would have known any better. So why did he reveal this to Abraham? And the Torah tells us. The Torah tells us that Abraham had a special place in Hashem's perspective of the world. Why? So listen to what the Torah says. It doesn't say because he was tested with 10 trials, 10 challenges, and passed all of them. It doesn't say because he nearly sacrificed his son. It doesn't say because he destroyed the idols of his father. It doesn't say because he was the father of monotheism. It doesn't say any of those things. Why did Hashem choose to reveal himself to Avram and to tell Avram what was going to happen with stone? Says the Torah, because Avraham raised his children to follow in Hashem's ways. The one overarching, endearing trait of Avraham that caused Hashem to reveal to Avram what he was about to do was not that Avram was a great tzaddik, not that Avram learned Torah all day long, but that Avraham raised his children properly. That's what counts in Hashem's eyes. What we do when we raise our children. This week, in the Torah reading for this week, Parshas Shmot, I figured I'd catch both the Ashkenazis and the Sephardi, both of them, Parshas Shmot, all right? So in this week's Parsha, we read of two special women, not named, but they are referred to as the Miyaldot HaIvriyot, the Jewish midwives. Who were their names? Anybody remember their names? The Torah calls them Shifra and Puah. Shifra and Puah. Who were they really? Says Rashi, Yocheved and Miriam. They were Yocheved and Miriam. Why were they called Shifra and Puah? Because they had, says Rashi, different jobs when the babies were born. Shifra was Yocheved, and she used to make the babies look nice. These babies, when they first come out, are a sight to behold. Right? Baruch Hashem, mommies don't get to see that right away. Daddies sometimes see it and pass out. Right? When the babies come out, they need to be cleaned up. The nurses know how to do this. They clean up the babies before they give them to the mommy. And mommy's, oh, you came out so nice and beautiful. All right? That was Yocheved's job. She cleaned up the babies. Lishaper is to make something look nice. To do renovations in your home is lishaper. Right? So she cleaned up the babies. That's why she was called Shifra. What about Puah? Puah used to make sound. Puah. She used to coo to the babies to get them to settle, to get them to be quiet. Sometimes you talk to a baby, right? You make these crazy sounds that you would never be caught saying to any other adult anywhere in the world, and yet the babies respond. They hear your voice, they respond, and they calm down, they settle. Okay? She'll take that baby home, not a problem. Okay? Right? So that's what's Miriam's job. Miriam's job was that. Listen to this. These women, Yocheved and Miriam, they were the most righteous women at the time. The mother and the sister of Moshe and Aaron. They were Niviot. They were prophetesses. And yet, what does the Torah praise them for? Not because they were so righteous. Not because they were prophets. Why does the Torah praise them? Because they took care of helping to raise children. Bringing children into this world. It is the most important job in the world. And we are the ones who do it. And when I say we, I mean all of you. Right? Because even though your husbands help, sometimes that help doesn't go so far. And sometimes that help might be even counterproductive. And the burden really falls, right? The burden really falls on all of you. So that's what we're going to talk about today. Okay, so that's what we're going to talk about today, how to raise these spiritual and confident children with the knowledge that indeed we can do it. What's the mitzvah of procreation called? The mitzvah of having children, what's that called? Peru or vu. You're all familiar with it. Peru or vu. How do we translate Peru or vu? Come on, you all know it. How do we translate Peru or vu? Be fruitful and multiply. Be fruitful and multiply. It's the man's favorite mitzvah, right? Be fruitful and multiply. This is an obligation of having children. Okay? Be fruitful and multiply. Says Rav Shimshon Raphael Hirsch. Maybe you've heard of the name. One of the great rabbinic commentaries who lived in Germany at the time in the 1800s. So Rav Hirsch writes in a beautiful way. He says, what is this Peru or vu business? Peru is related to the word pre. What does pre mean? Fruit, right? To produce fruit. So Peru makes sense. When you have children, you are doing what trees do, what vegetation does. Seeds, you produce fruit. Peru makes sense. What is uravu? So he says that uravu means not only reproduce, not only attend to the physical needs of these children, but attend to their spiritual, their emotional needs as well. That's part of our job. It doesn't end when the children come out. And it doesn't even end when the children go on their own. It's something that continues throughout the life of your children. And don't think for a moment that you are going to reach a place where you can simply wash your hands and say, oh, no more. Because then you'll have the opportunity to fix all the mistakes that you made with your children in your grandchildren. Right? And that's what grandparents do. Right? We try to fix all the mistakes that we made with our children and our grandchildren. Sometimes we're successful, sometimes we're not so successful, but it's a lifelong process. Okay, so let's talk a little bit about how we encourage children to be spiritual. I'm going to begin with an apology, because I'm not sure you're going to like all of the things that I say today. So if I say things that you don't like, I apologize. I'm going to say them anyway, because I think they're important, and I think they're germane to what we're talking about. Okay, there was a study done by a professor, Professor David Brenhardt, from the National Council of Family Relations. There is such a council, National Council of Family Relations. He did this study, he's a professor, and the study found a negative correlation between materialism and spirituality. Okay, think about that for a second. A negative correlation between spiritualism and between materialism and spirituality. What does that mean? What does it mean, plain words? It means the more you give to your kids, the more materialistic our lives are, the less spiritual they're going to be. Great. Talk to a bunch of ladies in Great Neck. Right? The more material we are, the less spiritual we're going to be. The more we indulge our children with material things, the less spiritual those children are going to be. Why? Is that a surprise to anyone? Right? I mean, you might not live that way. Sometimes it's hard to live that way in the communities in which we live, but it shouldn't come as a surprise to anyone. And why is that? So what he found in his study is that when you indulge your children, what he calls overindulging your children, all children need to be indulged to a certain extent, but overindulging your children, giving them the material things in life. When you do that, what happens? So children start to develop what's called extrinsic goals. What does extrinsic mean? It means outside of oneself, right? They start to develop extrinsic goals. Like what? Like what matters, what a child starts to think if a parent is constantly overindulging, giving material things as rewards for things. If you do this, you'll get this. Right? We'll do this, all of these things. So a child starts to think that those are the most important things in life. And therefore, what I want to aspire to is to be rich. What I want to aspire to is to be famous. What I want to aspire to is always to look the best and have the nicest and latest fashions. That's what we do when we overindulge our children. Because materialism, when we reward children with materialism, so what do they naturally think? Gee, why are my parents giving me something that's bad? They're obviously giving me something that's good, right? They're rewarding me. They're obviously giving me something they believe in. And if they're giving me something that they value, something that's good, something that they believe in, so I should also believe in it. I should also value it. So there's a great story. I shouldn't say great. It's actually a painful story of this young man who went off the derech. You know what it means to go off the derech, right? You know, it was, right, grew up in a religious home, went to yeshiva, and then turned off the derech, right? Abandoned it all. And his rabbi was talking to, he went to see the rabbi was talking to him. And the rabbi said, well, can you trace your going off the derech to one particular event? And he said, yes. It was one thing. And what was that? He said, my parents, when they raised me, always told me how excited they were about Shabbos, about doing mitzvos, about helping other people. And I lived in a home where they kept Shabbos, and they did mitzvot, and they did chesed, and they helped other people, and they always told me they were excited about it. But you know what? When my next door neighbor got a brand new car, and I saw how excited my father was, so then I knew they weren't excited about Shabbat. Then I knew they weren't excited about doing mitzvot, because I saw really what excitement was. So we live in this material world, and if we give children material things all the time, if we overindulge them, then we are compromising on their spirituality. Because what should a child's goals be if you want them to be spiritual? They should be about self-growth. They should be about connecting with other people. They should be about making the world a better place. I'm talking in the broadest sense of spirituality. That when we do that, when we encourage our children to have those goals, which are called intrinsic goals, so then that helps them to be spiritual. So that's topic number one, right? Idea number one is to avoid overindulging your children. Because when they focus on intrinsic material things, they focus not on others, but on themselves. How can I become rich? How can I become famous? How can I look the best? When they focus on intrinsic goals, so they focus more on connecting with other people. How can I help other people? How can I grow through other people? How can I make the world a better place? And connection and spirituality are like this. Right? You want to be spiritual, you want to be more spiritual, connect with other people. That helps you to be more spiritual. Okay. Good. Anybody want to leave? I'm sorry. I know it's hard. I know it's hard to talk about not being spiritual in our, not being material in the community in which we live, but it's actually a very important value. Okay. Number two. When your children ask you spiritual questions, so don't ignore them or brush them off. For instance, you're walking with take your child into the city to go, to go see the Big Apple Circus. Do you ever do that? I don't know.
Mm-hmm.
Like the Big Apple Circus, or to take them to a restaurant, or to take them ice skating, whatever you do. You take them into the city. Right? What's the wax museum? I don't know. I'm thinking about all these things, right? All these things we used to do. Wax museum. You take your children into the city, and inevitably, when you come out of the train or the subway, there's going to be a homeless person who's there asking for money. And your children might see that, and they're going to say to you, Mommy, why did Hashem do that? Why did Hashem make people poor? Or they're watching television, or they're on their computers, or they're on their phones, and they say to you, Mommy, how could Hashem allow these children to be killed in school? They take these things very personally. And they might ask you the question, or they might not ask you the question. But if they ask you the question, what is our tendency? Ask your father when he comes home, right? Possibility number one. Or possibility number two is simply to say, we can't answer these things. And you know what happens when you do that? Right away, you shut down their inquisitiveness. You shut down their curiosity. What you need to say is, that's a great question. And even if you can't answer it yourselves, and I think all of us have problems answering these questions, say to them, it's a great question. Let's see if we can find an answer. Let's work together to try to find an answer. Encourage your children to ask you these difficult questions in life. Mommy, what happens after somebody dies? Encourage them to ask those questions. I mean, those questions might give us goosebumps. We might have a hard time with them, but it's a joint effort together with your children to try to explore these spiritual realms. The more that we can encourage them, so then the more they'll be encouraged to ask. And be honest with the answers. It's okay to say, I don't know. But don't say, I don't know, and shut them down. Say, I don't know, and let's look to try to find an answer. Did you ever occasion where you spoke to your husband and you asked him a question and said, I don't know? And what message did you get? I don't want to talk about it. Right? I don't know really meant stop bothering me. I have to, I'm watching a game, or stop bothering me, I'm checking email or something like that. I don't know. I don't know, just like that, is not a great answer. But I don't know, that's a great question. Let's try to find out an answer. That's how you encourage spirituality in children. And quite frankly, that's how you encourage spiritual growth within yourself. You know what? There's lots of questions we don't know answers to. So let's work together with our children to try to find an answer. And the answer for the child might be a little bit different than the answer you need. But to consider the child's question valid is important. Okay, here's the last one when it comes to spirituality, and perhaps the most important. Let's model spiritual growth ourselves. You want your children to grow spiritually, you know what? They are watching you and me and all the adults around. Not to hear what we say, but to see what we do. To see if we walk the walk. We all talk the talk, but to see if we walk the walk. Here's a great example. How many words are in Birkat HaMazon? Anybody knows this, I might just fall over, right? How many words are in Birkat HaMazon? Approximately 555, depending upon what day of the week it is, approximately 555. Out of those 555 words, so 65% of them fulfill the biblical obligation of Birkat HaMazon through the first 4 brachot of Birkat HaMazon, and the rest of them, the other 45%, are in the, what we call the Harachaman section, which is not the essential part of Birkat HaMazon. It's asking Hashem for things, and we do it because at the time when we're thanking Hashem for the meal, it's a good time to ask Hashem for things. So let's forget 555. Let's say that there are 360 words of Birkat HaMazon that really matter. So the Chavetz Chaim says that when a person speaks, he or she can speak 3 words a second. So if we figure that out, that means you could say all of the benching in about 90 seconds. 90 seconds. You could bench everything. What do you think your kids are going to think if you bench in 90 seconds? They're going to say, what is this? What's going on here? I will tell you, this happens at our Shabbos table often. We slip into this rote behavior. It'll come time to bench, Shabbos afternoon, I'm thinking nap. I'm thinking sofa, nap, Shabbos afternoon. And it comes time to bench, and I'm benching, and I look across the table, and my wife is looking at me. And she's like, you can't possibly be saying all those words. Right? Just too fast. Right? Can't possibly be doing it. She's absolutely right, most of the time. Right? She's absolutely right. She's absolutely right all the time with everything else, but most of the time she's right. And because I slip into a pattern that all of us have. We don't think about what we're doing. We act on automatic pilot. If our children see us that way, what does that say to our children? If it comes time to eat and we're serving our kids bread and we're going to sit with them and we don't do Netilat Yadayim and we don't say Hamotzi out loud, I know it might seem strange, how are they supposed to learn? If we don't say Birkat HaMazon and spend time saying it or singing it even with our children, sing it. We all know that crazy melody that doesn't make any sense. Sing it with our children. We model spirituality. When we model it, you know what? So our children learn it. That's what spirituality is all about. Modeling it for our children and having them learn it. Good. Okay, that's how we raise. Okay, that's how we raise spiritual children. What about confidential? How do you give your children confidence so that they can grow up in a confidential kind of world? They can be confidential people in a difficult world. I was talking before we began. I was talking about how this world that we're living in is a much more difficult world than the world of our parents, right? And the world our parents were raised in. Actually, think about it. I grew up in a world, I mean, I know I'm old, right? I grew up in a world where there was no internet. There were no computers. There were no cell phones. Think about how much easier it was for me. In many ways, I mean, there are things that I couldn't do, obviously. Connections that I couldn't make, information that I couldn't find out. Believe it or not, in those days, if you wanted to write a term paper, you actually had to go to the library and sit down and take actual books off the shelf. You had to find them. You had to use the card catalog. You had to find the books, right? You had to find the books, and then you had to sit and you had to read the information. Today, you can just ask Alexa, right? And don't think your kids aren't doing that when you're not watching. They have a math problem and you're not around, they are asking Alexa for that answer. Right? They're absolutely doing that, right? And if you think they're not, check it out. Right? They're absolutely doing it. So things were a lot less complicated in the world in which I grew up. They're a lot more complicated today. The pressures on parents are much more challenging today. Pressures of making a living in an affluent society, affording all of the things that we need to afford, keeping up with the Joneses or the Shabolians, whatever it might be, right? wherever you're living in Great Neck, right? It's not so easy. It's a very complicated life that we live, much more complicated, I think, than our parents lived in. So let's talk about how we can raise confident children in such a society. Okay, number one, it's not the results that matter. I'm telling you this, you're going to shake your head, but you're not going to believe it. It's not the results that matter. It doesn't matter whether your kid gets a 95 on the test or a 65 on the test. As long as he or she is trying his best. You want to raise a confident child? Praise your child for the effort, not for the result. If your child is putting in his or her best effort and comes back with a 65, praise your child for that effort. Of course you don't have to be happy with the 65, but don't criticize the child for the 65. Say, I know how hard you worked for that. I know the effort that you put in. Now, if your child didn't put an effort in, okay, that's a different story. You have to deal with that. But when it comes to raising a child, if children think that the only thing that matters is the result, guess what they're going to do when they get older? They're going to cheat. They're going to do whatever they can to get the result that makes their parents happy. I don't need to learn, I just need to figure out what the answers are. So if you want to encourage your children to be confident about themselves, to believe in themselves, so it's not the result that matters, it's the effort. You have to praise their effort. Sometimes it's really hard because we live in a world where our attention spans are, 45 seconds, a minute. When I first went into the rabbinate, any sermon that was less than 20 minutes was didn't really qualify as a sermon. Today, if I speak more than 11 or 12 minutes, they're gone, sleeping, snoring, right? Come on, attention spans are much shorter today. Think about it. Because what do we spend our lives doing? We spend our lives focusing on, right, short bits of information, text messages, Instagram messages, short posts, right? When was the last time you spent time looking into a subject? Think about it in your own lives. Our lives are superficial. Our lives are sound bites. Our attention spans are short. So it's very hard to get our kids to sit and to persevere and to work. So praise the efforts when they do that. You know what? If your child sits and studies for 10 minutes, praise them for those 10 minutes. That's amazing. 15 minutes, that's amazing. They need to be praised for the effort. And when you praise them for the effort, it doesn't matter what they get on the test. Obviously, it does matter. They might not get into Harvard, I understand. It does matter, but if you praise them for the effort, you will develop confident children who believe in themselves, who believe that they are capable of doing things. Okay, ready for this one? Let your children fail. Let your children fail. No more important lesson for raising confident children than to let them fail. Do not be an over-nurturing parent. We spoke about not being an over-indulgent parent when it comes to spirituality. When it comes to self-confidence, do not be an over-nurturing your child, over-nurturing parent. Here, let me help you figure that out. Here, no, that's not the right way to do it. Here's the right way to do it. No, you don't want to do this, you want to do that. Let your children fail. I know that's harsh, but it's the best way to raise confident children. Because how do you learn? How do we all learn? How do we continue to learn? Trial and effort. Try something, it doesn't work out. What do you learn to do? Try something else. You're not going to try something that doesn't work out again. You're going to try something else until you figure out the right thing. And when you figure out the right thing, how do you feel? You feel great. Whereas I know if I tell my husband, take out the garbage, not going to work. Right? If I say to my husband, you know, it means so much to me when you take out the garbage. It's a sign of your love and affection for me. Still might not work, right? But you have a better shot. Trial and error. That's how we all learn, and that's how our children learn. If you're always there to stop your children from falling, it's not good. And I had to learn this myself, relearn it myself. Again, when I took my grandchildren to the playground. Because what was I thinking? God forbid my grandchild falls and gets all scraped up and cut up. So my kids are going to think I'm not doing my job. Till I realized, you know what? It's good. Let them fall. I mean, obviously, you don't want them to get hurt, right? But let a child try something and realize, you know what? I'm not yet ready for that. If a child does that, then when the times when a child accomplishes something, it will make that child so much more self-confident. Okay, I'll share a few more things with you, and then we'll open up for some questions if you want. Okay, so let them fail. Let them figure out problems for themselves. Do not do their homework for them. Do not do their reports for them. Do not do their projects for them. I remember always as a parent walking around, when they had these, when all the kids, science fair, all the kids would put out their projects, I would say, parent. You could just tell. You could tell which parents did projects for the kids. Right? Don't do that. It's the worst possible thing. You might have every parent saying, your kid, look what your kid did for the science project. But you know what? Your child will grow up confident in their abilities, and their child won't. Right? Let your children do their own projects. And you know what? When they do it, praise what they've done. Even if it's not something you would have done. Even if the volcano doesn't explode the way it's supposed to explode. Praise them because they did it themselves. Okay. Help your children practice what they want to accomplish. You know, sometimes we try new things and it doesn't work the first time. Think you're doing a recipe. You're doing a recipe, you're baking something, or you're making something for Shabbos, and here's the recipe. You're using one of those cookbooks. I don't know, my wife will tell you the cookbooks, right? You're using one of those cookbooks, and you try it, and it comes out terrible, right? So you know what? So you need to practice. It doesn't always happen the first time. You need to try it again. You need to figure out what went wrong. So if your children are learning a new skill, they're learning how to play soccer, they're learning how to play basketball, they're learning how to do ballet, they're learning how to ice skate, whatever it is, help them to practice. You as a parent have that responsibility. You know what, it's very easy just to show up at Parkwood when it's ice skating lessons and say, okay, you know, go ahead and drop them off, let them run in. But unless you're willing to go back with them and let them practice, and let them learn on their own to fall down and to get up and, oh, this is how I do it, right? This helps them to be a little bit better. Okay. Last thing, okay? Don't allow our children to escape the world of reality. And all of our children want to do that. Why? Guess why? Because they see us do it. We escape the world of reality. How? Instagram, right? Instagram. What happens? I'm bored. I have something to do that I don't want to do. I'm just going to check the Instagram posts for today. How many times have you done that? And 45 minutes later, realize, oh my God, I didn't get dinner ready. Or 45 minutes later, realize, oh my God, I have to go pick up my children. Right? It's mindless. It's an escape from the world in which we live. We all need to do it from time to time, but we need to be really careful that our children don't immerse themselves in that. Because you know what lives in that virtual world? Perfection. Look at the pictures that you see. Perfect bodies, perfect clothes, perfect lives. And guess what? The world is not perfect. We need to teach our children that the world in which we live isn't perfect. There are challenges. People look funny sometimes. Not everybody looks the same. And we need to teach our children that that's real. That's what life is. It's not all about perfection. Life is not perfect. People have challenges, they have problems, they have issues. It's not about perfection. And if we let them escape into this world, this virtual world, so we deprive them of what it really means to live in a world of reality. And they won't grow up understanding what reality is all about. Okay, spiritual, confident children. I hope I've given you some things to think about. Any questions? Yeah.
And I'm sorry, I have to go pick up my child, but I quickly, what happens if something isn't like intrinsic in your child, right? Like you have one child who's really okay, I can't, something's not easy for me, I'm gonna try. And you have another child who, when things are not easy for them, they turn off. Like, how do you motivate a child when something is sort of maybe not in their nature, not in their, do you just say it a lot even and hope it picks on and, it takes on at some point, or what is your job as the parent?
Your job, so I would suggest that you keep in mind the role model of a nursery school teacher. Right? What does a nursery school teacher do when the nursery school teacher wants to teach the children how to play? What does he or she do? Gets on the floor, plays with the kids. Put yourselves both feet into your children's lives. It's not something that we want to do because I have 10 million other things that are pressing on my head. But take a moment, shut those down, and help your child by doing it together with your child. Let's do this together. Let's read this together. Let's try to understand this together. Let's play this game together. Right? Let's work on that problem together. Now, obviously, you don't want to solve the problem for them, but let's work on this problem together. Listen to what they have to say and say, gee, might there be another way to look at this? Can you look at it any other way? We're all good at this. We are all intrinsically good at this. We didn't get to where we are right now without being good at this. We can all do this. So let's try to figure out, get on the floor with them. That's the best thing to remember. Get on the floor with them. Sometimes it's hard because we don't really have time, right? We don't have time to do it. We have to make the time, right? And remember, all of your children are different. Every single one of your children is different than the other, and I promise you they will stay that way for the rest of their lives, right? You will deal with those differences for the rest of their lives, and one day you will bask in the glory of those differences. Because you have one child who's great at one thing and another child who's great at another thing, and they'll all take care of you when you're older, right? Use all those different skills to take care of you when you're older. But the idea that our children are different, some children you don't have to get on the ground with, you don't have to get on the floor with because they're able to do it themselves. And others are more challenged with that. Some children have natural inclinations to sit and read. And others, reading is torture. So you have to adjust your life with them, right, to try to help each one. Any other questions? Great question. Yeah.
This might be more of a big question, probably for parents with their kids. What happens when you do have Instagram and social media, and you go to schools that discuss, more, for lack of a better way of putting it, non-binary, all the different genders out there. How do you discuss that with your kids? And how do you approach that?
Okay, so it's very important to, first of all, set limits on your children when they are using their devices. Any parent who thinks that a child is going to get off of Instagram because I told you you have half an hour on Instagram, we can't even get off of Instagram if we tell ourselves half an hour. How do we expect our children to do that? You have to set times. You have to set times on their devices.
I don't think it's necessarily the timing. I think it's all the information that's out there.
Content.
It's the content. It's the
Right.
content. It's not the time.
Okay, so you have to start earlier, giving your children the confidence in your love for them to ask you whatever questions they want to ask. You need to be able to sit with your children and say, I'm always here. If you have any questions, there's nothing off limits, and nothing should be off limits. Like, nothing is off limits. You want to ask me a question about anything, nothing is off limits. And if you check your children's devices, and I hate to say this, but I encourage you to check your children's devices, see where they've been, see what they're up to. I know it's an invasion of privacy, but it's your job, right? Check your children's devices, see what they've been up to. If you see they've been reading something that you can't imagine they understand or process, find a way to begin the conversation with them. Find a way to do it. So for instance, right, a massacre at a school, God forbid. They all know about it. How many of us sit down with our children and say, did you hear the terrible news from today? How do you feel about it? I'll tell you how I'm feeling. How do you feel about it? What are you thinking about it? Right? Talk to them. Obviously, they're not adults, but give them the time and put in the effort that you would give to someone you really care about, because you really care about them, to hear what their opinions are. The more you do that, the more they will learn it's okay to come to mommy with questions. And yeah, what happens when they come and they say, mommy, he's a she, she's a he. I'm not even sure what that is, right? So then you explain to them about the world around them. That's the job of being a parent. Explain to them there are people who do things differently than we do. You start that early when there are some people who are driving to Shul on Shabbos, right? They see people driving the street, and they're little, and they say, what about Shabbat? How can they drive? You say, people do things differently than we do. Right? This is what we do. People do things differently. Not everybody does the same thing. Does that help?
Yeah, if I put it in, we accept it, but it's not what we do.
No question is off limits.
Right.
There's no topic that's taboo. Right? There are people that do this. It might not be the way that we do things.
Right.
We do what we think. We do things the way we think are best for us and for our family. But everybody makes decisions in life differently. Anybody else? Questions? Okay. Yes.
How do you approach situations when your kids are always saying, "You're never listening to me. You're always listening to her. You run to this one and you're ignoring me," but like they're all saying it. Like you can't. It's not like just this one kid feels less than, like neglected.
So I think it's important to know that our children judge us all the time. Right? right? Literally all the time, no matter what, and we never, ever live up to their expectations, right? So don't let that bother you. If one says, hey, you're giving all the time to that one, and what about me? You should be able to sleep at night hearing that information. But let it go in, and think about it. Maybe, is there an element of truth there? Am I indeed giving this one more attention because this one is easier and that one's harder? And maybe they're right. Right? Think about it, right? But when they say that to you, the response needs to be not, oh, I'm not doing that. The response needs to be, wow, I didn't know you felt that way. Let's talk about it, right? Let's see, maybe I think we can do things a little bit differently. Don't shut down their questions. Don't shut down their statements, okay? And when they say that inevitable, I hate you, welcome to the world of parenthood, right? Welcome to the world of parenthood. I used to write my parents notes, I hate you, right? They kept all the notes, and when I had my first child, they delivered them, right? It will happen, I promise. Anyone else? You are an absolutely, oh yes, go ahead.
What age do you think it's appropriate to start having these serious conversations? My eldest is 5, and I started having some real conversations with him lately, and he kind of like looks at me blank face. But I know he understands what I'm saying. I don't know if it's a little too young when he just turned 5.
So I think it all, every child matures at a different point. We have this discussion in halacha, right? At what point does a child have what we call da'at, knowledge, understanding? Every child matures at a different point. Well, it depends. If it's your 4th child, he or she might mature at a faster point, right, than your first child, because they're getting fed all the information from the other 3.
Right.
So you have to make that judgment, and always remember to keep your conversations age appropriate. In other words, what you are sharing with a 5-year-old should not be what you share with your husband or what you share with your girlfriend. In other words, if you're talking about something, you have to remember that they have a limited understanding of the world, right? So you want to broaden their horizons, but you don't want to broaden their horizons so much so that they shut down. It's a model in leadership. When you lead, you want to be far enough ahead so that people follow, but not too far ahead so that people lose sight of you. That's what you need to do when it comes to having that conversation. And remember, you're talking to a 5-year-old, so you need to put things in a 5-year-old's perspective. Which means you need to crawl back into your head, to think, well, what does a 5-year-old understand? What does a 5-year-old think? And do that in such a way. It's always good if you have a story, if you have an example, something that relates to that child's life. When I talk about death with children, which sometimes I have to do, I always try to come up with something that connects to a child's life. Maybe the death of a pet, right, or something that you love that got lost, or something like that, right? To try to help that child understand that concept a little bit.
Can I say something?
Of course. You're asking me?
I just want to thank you so much. I'm sitting here, my children are a little older than most of yours, but this is so resonant because I think about children a great deal in various capacities, and mainly as a lawyer who represents kids who get in trouble. So when I think about kids who get in trouble in school and face suspension, for example, or kids who have learning disabilities, you're trying to coach a family through a situation of how to get a child help, and it's always about, well, how can I get this family to understand that their child needs help and that there's a future for them, and that this particular situation, as bad as it seems, whatever it is, there's a future there. And it starts with thinking about a future and getting the child there, and getting their family to understand that they need to get the child there, and mom and dad, or whoever the guardians are, have to all come together for that to happen. And it's hard when you're in the middle of that conflict. It's hard. And I've lived it myself as a parent. But as a community member, I'm also struggling, because as I'm listening to you, and I want to go back to where you started, Rabbi. I've lived here for many years, and sometimes when families have a conflict or when a child gets in trouble, I'll refer to a story that's easily from like 15 or 20 years ago, but it made national news. When we had a student here in Great Neck who made national news because an individual student wanted to make money, did make money, by cheating on the SAT. So that was an ethical issue, a student who was cheating on the SAT by selling his services and taking the exam for other students. But of course, that wasn't just the kid selling his services at several $1,000s a pop. It was parents of the students that he was using as clients undermining their own children's abilities in the way the rabbi was describing, objectifying their children, seeking only the end of a score because they didn't have the confidence in their children's ability to do well on an exam, and so they thought they would take the easy route and pay for their children to have a high score, and so they paid this other kid to take the exam, and that made national news, and that was a Great Neck story, and it becomes a communal story because people look away, they look away, and that happens all the time at parties, and it happens all the time in play dates, and it happens all the time from the time children are small. If families look away while other kids and families are not raising ethical children in the way you described. So what you said is just so important, Rabbi. I just wanted to thank you.
Thank you all for coming. Amazing.
Thank you, Rabbi.
Great to have you.
Thank you, Rabbi.
My pleasure, really my pleasure. And thank you again to Dina, who, here you are, was keeping a watch over all of us and the family at the same time, Baruch Hashem. And of course, Rachel, to you for putting this together. If you have any great ideas about things that you want to hear, you want to do it again, Rachel's the person to talk to. I'm around. Glad to do it. Okay, have a great day.